now I would like to introduce our guest presenter for today. We have Dr. Andrea Wilkinson with us, who has a PhD in psychology. She has a specialization in cognitive aging and has been researching brain health and cognitive maintenance for over 15 years. Dr. Andrea is also the founder and CEO of BrainShape.ca, as well as the host of the BrainShape podcast. It is a weekly show about the latest brain health research and interviews with experts in the field of health and aging. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrea Wilkinson. Welcome, Dr. Andrea.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for the introduction, and hello, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. So if you want to say hi in the chat box, let me know where you are tuning in from, and let me know that you can hear me okay. Hello. Yeah, all is good. People are here from Toronto, Eglinton West. Wonderful. Vancouver, Oakville. Great. Downtown Toronto, from the beaches. Wonderful. Hamilton, Mississauga, Hyde Park. Wonderful. Great. I'm so excited. I'm glad that you are all here. I'm glad that you can hear me properly. As Mary said, we're going to be talking all about stress, sleep, and mental challenges. So I think that that is an appropriate conversation for the current scenario that we are all dealing with. I just want to make sure that everyone mutes their audio. You can hear something banging around in the background. I'm sure others can hear it as well. So just make sure that you're and let me know. Send me a note in the chat box to let me know that you can hear me. I know that the administrators just muted everyone, so I want to make sure. Okay, great. You can hear me. Perfect. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about me. So Mary talked a little bit about my story, but I did want to frame it as my love for aging and cognition really started when I was an undergraduate student at McMaster University. I started studying gerontology, which is the study of aging, along with psychology, and my interest in cognition and understanding how our mental abilities change with age really came from working in and doing some experiential placements in long-term care homes. I was working specifically in long-term care homes and locked units for people with mid to late stage dementia. Dementia is a neurodegenerative brain disorder. It's not a part of normal aging, but it is associated with a lot of serious cognitive impairments. So people have serious memory challenges. And like I said, I was working in these locked units of people who I felt were misunderstood in how it is that we approach care with them. There are these very serious cognitive changes and limitations that take place. And as a young undergraduate student, I became fascinated with understanding I think I was muted again, so I want to make sure that I am, you can hear me. You can hear me again. Audio's off, audio's back on. Everyone can hear me? Say yes in the comments just to be sure. Yes, wonderful. Great. So I became fascinated with understanding these cognitive changes that happen, but how do we leverage the abilities that remain intact by understanding what abilities remain as someone progresses through dementia? We can then begin to interact with them in a way that's meaningful and that makes use of the abilities that remain. So this really was the foundation for my love of understanding aging and cognition and memory. And so in addition to that, because that was the sort of far end spectrum of cognitive and neurodegenerative disorders. So these are the very serious mental changes that happen in dementia. But I was fascinated also with understanding, if that's the far end of the spectrum, what can we do in our everyday lives that can help protect our mental abilities as we get older? There are normal age-related changes that happen that's not associated with dementia or any of that pathology, but what can we do in our everyday lives that helps preserve our mental functions? And I went on to do my graduate school at Ryerson University. I did my master's there and my PhD, and I became interested in looking at what we can do to help protect our mental functions. I, at the time, was studying brain games. Of course, that is not the way to preserve our mental functions. You get better at the game, but you don't get better at overarching mental functions. And so that sort of led me down this path and really exploring and understanding brain plasticity. What do we do in our everyday lives? What experiences can we search out? What environments can we place ourselves in that really help change our brain and help keep our brain healthy for as long as possible? So brain plasticity is such an amazing concept, and it's this idea that our brain is plastic and malleable. So our brain can change physically, so the actual size and thickness of the different parts of our brain can change in response to our experiences and the environment. Our brain can change functionally, so how quickly and efficiently our brain works can also change. And also it can change chemically. So the chemicals in our brain are called neurotransmitters. And what we expose ourselves to, what we challenge ourselves with, can change and alter the biochemistry in our brains. And so I became fascinated with this idea of brain plasticity and really started to understand what we can do in our everyday lives that can help our brain stay plastic and healthy for as long as possible. So there are 4 key pillars to brain health: physical fitness, food and nutrition, socializing and staying emotionally connected, as well as what I call mental considerations, which is also sleeping, stress management, and challenging yourself. So I became fascinated with understanding what we can do in our everyday lives across these 4 pillars that can help optimize our brain health. And so through my company, Brain Shape, it's really about integrating these 4 key pillars of brain health in a way that's meaningful to you. How does it fit within your specific life, your context, your interests? And so that is really my mission at Brain Shape. And so in alignment with that mission, I teamed up with Ryerson University and Programs for 50 Plus to put on this workshop series to really do a deep dive into these various pillars of brain health. So at workshop number 1, if you were there, let me know in the chat box if you were at workshop number 1. We talked about food and nutrition and physical fitness. And today we're going to be talking all about what I call the mental considerations, which is stress, managing our stress, sleeping well, and then also how do we challenge ourselves in a meaningful way. Great. There are so many of you that were at the first workshop, so I'm so happy that you are back today to learn about stress and sleep and mental challenges. So let's get to it. Let's talk about stress. So stress is really based in evolution. If we think about why it is that we even get stressed in the first place, it's really based in evolution. If we go back tens of thousands of years, as humans, we evolved needing our stress response to be able to survive. So our stress response, you'll often hear of it talked in the same way as your flight or flight response. So you're either going to be fighting off a predator or running away from it as quickly as possible. So as I mentioned, this is really our survival mechanism. Our stress response helped us survive. So when we evolved, we needed this stress response to give us the energy to fight or flee a predator. So if there was a lion rustling in the bushes, your heart would start to beat faster and you would get a bunch of energy so that you could either run away or you could fight off or distract this lion. So when we are faced with a threatening situation and we mount our stress response, I want you to think about how it is based in this evolutionary context and how it really was our survival mechanism. But now in the current day, I mean, current day is a little bit of an asterisk, I think, in terms of our stress response. But currently, when we think about what we would typically be stressed at, we're stressed out about traffic or whether we're going to make something extremely delicious for dinner, or if we have a deadline that we're trying to meet, or if we think a friend is mad at us or misunderstood something that we said. Those events make us feel stressed. It mounts the same stress response as we had when we were literally about to try to fight or flee a lion. So regardless of whether it's a real stressor, really actually going to be based in a life or death situation, which is rare, more rare these days, but COVID, as I mentioned, is a little bit of an asterisk. But even if you were imagining a stressor, if you were thinking that someone's upset at you or thinking about a deadline that if it got pushed, what would that mean for your timelines? Even if it's just imagined in your mind and not real yet, you can still mount the same stress response. Your body will still respond in the same way as if it was a real stressor. So we can think about all the different things that happen in your body as a result of feeling stressed out. So I know you can think about a time that you were stressed. Maybe you're stressed today, or you have been in the last couple of months, which is understandable. But a typical stress response is your heart starts to beat faster than normal, which increases the amount of blood flow to your muscles. Your blood pressure actually goes up because you need to send blood to your limbs. And the reason behind this is because in evolutionary terms, we were supposed to be fighting or fleeing predators. Your breathing will speed up, sending more oxygen to your body and your brain to boost mental alertness. And glucose or sugar is released into your bloodstream to give you energy because your body is literally preparing to fight off a predator. So it needs energy. So it's like, oh, we need to get the sugar out of our sugar storage places and send it out into our muscles so that we have the energy to either run away or fight something. So all of these physiological changes occur when you're feeling stressed out. Even if you're stressed out just about, oh, what am I going to have for dinner today? Or I can't get Netflix to turn on. If that is your stressor, it still mounts the same sort of physiological changes in your body. So stress has this negative connotation. We think of, if you're stressed out, it's bad. But I want to remind you in that context of evolution is that there was a reason behind our stress response. And it is our body's response to perceived danger or threat. And it's meant to keep us alive, give you energy to perform, to run away or to fight, or to give you the mental focus that you need to get out of a stressful situation. And stress really gets us to do things. So it gets us to perform well when we're giving a workshop virtually over Zoom with hundreds of people in attendance, or it helps you to meet deadlines. So there is a reason behind the stress. The issue arises when stress is chronic. And this may be something that is resonating with you now more so than it has previously, because we are living in a very stressful global situation. So people are forced to work at home. They're outside of their normal routines. They're not exercising as much. They are maybe spending more time indoors. They're feeling stressed out and overwhelmed with the workload and learning curves with having to change the way everything works. So chronic stress is problematic. Stress in small bouts is not problematic, but this chronic stress is. And the reason why chronic stress, being consistently stressed out, is bad is because it constantly keeps you in this state of readiness to fight or flee. And your sympathetic nervous system, which is part of your autonomic nervous system, there's two branches of your autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is responsible for your fight or flight response. So when you're chronically stressed out, that system is always going to be on. So we can think of our autonomic nervous system having these two parts, as I mentioned. The parasympathetic nervous system is really this rest and digest and recover stage. This is the stage where we are resting, we're sleeping, our body's restoring itself, we feel calm, we're digesting, our immune system is working, our heartbeat slows down, our breathing is slowed, everything is calm and relaxed. And the other alternative, the opposite side of that, is your parasympathetic nervous system. And that is activated when you are stressed out, when you are in that fight or flight response. Your heart rate is accelerated, you're getting more blood and oxygen to your extremities and to your vital organs. Your blood pressure goes up as a result of that. Your breathing is speeding up so that you get more oxygen around your body. And as I mentioned, your blood glucose is being sent out of storage to get it into your muscles so that you actually have energy. But as you can understand, when your sympathetic nervous system is turned on, your parasympathetic nervous system cannot be turned on. So these two sides of our autonomic nervous system work in opposition to each other. So when one is on, the other one cannot be activated. If you're feeling really, really stressed out, you can't do the resting and digesting component. So you can understand why this chronic stress would be such a problem. In addition, there is inflammation that is associated with your stress response. And again, inflammation is one of those terms that obviously has a bad rap, much like stress does, but it's because if there is chronic inflammation, that's when there is a problem. Inflammation is not always bad. It is a part of your body's defense mechanism. So your immune system recognizes and removes harmful materials so that it can begin the healing process. That's what inflammation is doing. It's actually searching out these harmful materials so that it can repair everything. But when you're stressed out, you're feeling stressed, remember to think back to this evolutionary context. Your body, our stress response is mounted based on evolution. Your body is expecting to be injured because remember, our stress response was initially activated during a life or death situation. So your body is stressed out. It's thinking there's a predator that's going to come and eat you or attack you. Your body is actually anticipating being injured. So when you're stressed out, you actually send out all these chemical mediators of inflammation because your body is getting ready to be injured. So when there's a little bit of inflammation, it's not a problem. It has a purpose. The problem is when this low-grade inflammation is constantly flowing around your body. If you are chronically stressed out and your body is primed and ready for attack, it is looking for these harmful materials. And sometimes with low-grade inflammation, it'll start to attack cells that it actually shouldn't be attacking. Chronic inflammation is linked to autoimmune disease, allergies, obesity, and it's also been linked to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and even brain disease. And so it is really important to understand that inflammation is linked to our stress response. So as I mentioned, chronic inflammation has been linked to many neurodegenerative disorders, for example, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, it's thought that this chronic inflammation is actually driving the brain pathology that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. So they're linking this chronic inflammation to the beta amyloid protein clumps and the neurofibrillary tangles. So those are the two pathology components that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. These beta amyloid clumps are really these protein clumps that build up between our brain cells, so it disrupts communication between the brain cells. And the neurofibrillary tangles get tangled up around a brain cell and will ultimately kill that brain cell. When there is high blood pressure, which is associated with your stress response, remember your heart's beating faster, you're not sleeping because you can't get your parasympathetic nervous system to activate. So you are feeling stressed, your blood is pumping harder and faster than it normally would. And this can also damage the tiny blood vessels that are in your brain. So when you have high blood pressure, which again is linked to stress, feeling stressed, feeling chronically stressed out, it can alter the structure of your brain and the way that your brain functions. And it can also limit how efficiently and effectively your brain clears out those beta amyloid protein clumps. So all of these pieces are really tied to this idea of stress, the inflammation that gets sent out into your body in anticipation of being injured, the high blood pressure because your heart is pumping a lot faster than it normally would. And it has a cascade effect on all of these other diseases that are not avoidable, but you can help reduce your risk by managing your stress. And let's talk about what happens to your brain when you are stressed out. So cortisol is our stress hormone. And over long periods of time, cortisol being prevalent in your system can damage your brain. And it specifically damages a part of your brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning. So I want to hear from you in the chat box. If you're feeling stressed right now, which I understand, it's totally understandable, and I understand a lot of people are feeling stressed right now. So let me know if you are feeling stressed right now, what you're feeling stressed about, and then also, are you noticing any changes to your memory that you can sort of link to feeling stressed out? So let me know in the chat box how stressed you are and what you are stressed about. Generalized stress. All right, so you're just stressed in general. Is anyone stressed about anything in particular? Not stressed, just tired. Yeah, so we'll get to the sleeping part for sure, talking about stress. Stressed about work, having controlling managers. There's a big learning curve right now with how we are able to manage our workloads at home with all of these moving parts. Can't think straight if you're feeling stressed. Yep, feeling stressed about technology. Yeah, so people are feeling really stressed about their family and health and having to adapt given all of the current changes that are happening. That is totally understandable. Can't see your family. That is absolutely, definitely very stressful. So, as I mentioned, stress, this cortisol, our stress hormone, really affects our brains and specifically affects our hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and learning. It stops your memory from functioning properly. And also cortisol, there's a lot of cortisol receptors on our hippocampus. Our hippocampus is very sensitive to cortisol, our stress hormone, so it actually makes it harder to remember. And just, I noticed some questions coming through in the chat box. Hold on to your questions until the end. We'll do a Q&A, and so I will go through all of your questions at that time. So let's talk about managing stress. If you are feeling stressed, obviously in the chat box, we heard a lot about people feeling stressed out during this time for a multitude of different reasons. So when I talk about how do you go about managing stress, I want to remind you and encourage you to think about your own specific situation, the specific things that trigger you, that stress you out personally. It might not make sense to anyone else, but if it stresses you out, it is worth diving into and uncovering and working through. There is a need to be personalized in your management of stress. So I know it's obvious, but I just want to remind you to think about your own unique situation and your stress responses, how you are feeling, and when you actually do feel stressed out yourself, and then dive into that to begin to figure out a plan that will work for you specifically. So notice what stresses you out. It's not going to be the same for everyone. There's things that stress me out that other people would just be like, what's the problem? That's not an issue at all. I get stressed out in traffic, and I know a million people that's like, well, we're going to be late. It doesn't matter. Why be stressed? Which I totally get and appreciate, but I can't help that it actually makes my heart beat faster and makes me feel the physiological feelings of being stressed out. So notice what gets you feeling stressed, what makes your heart race, what makes you feel that sense of anxiety, and then develop healthy boundaries. There's obviously some flexibility that has to be considered. If your job is stressing you out, you can't just quit your job, but think about ways to help manage the stress to lessen it, because as we just talked about, there are a lot of negative health effects associated with stress. Are you watching the news and it is making you feel really stressed out because of this global pandemic? If that's the case, limit the amount of news that you're watching and limit when you're watching the news. Don't have it on at night right before you're trying to fall asleep. Are certain people or situations draining you? How can you build healthy boundaries around those situations and those people to help you feel less stressed out? Exercise. If you follow me on social media, you will know that I talk about exercise all the time. It is so incredibly powerful for so many different reasons. One of them is that it can help you manage stress. So exercise will, if you are stressed, as we talked about, you get glucose or sugar sent out into your bloodstream to give you energy to run away from a predator. But as we know, there's not really a predator. You're just stressed about your technology not working properly, or a looming deadline, or what you're going to make for dinner. So you're not actually your body sends out the sugar or the glucose, but you don't even need it. So it just sits there, and then it gets stored away again as fat. So by exercising, you're going to make use of this extra glucose that is in your bloodstream. It will also help make sure that your heart is strong, which will then help lower your blood pressure. So really important to use exercise as a stress management tool. Again, thinking about how can you exercise in a way that is appropriate for you given your current situation, mobility issues, scenario. You can't do a full body workout at home if you have no equipment there. So what can you do with what you have? Reduced intake of stimulants, so caffeine, nicotine, sugar. These things activate our systems. It turns on our sympathetic nervous system. So we don't want to add extra stimulants if we are feeling stressed out. So consider reducing some of those stimulants in your life to help with the management of stress. And deep breathing, which I think is not always really appreciated, I think, for the true power and capabilities that it has. So slow, deep breathing will stimulate your vagus nerve. So that is the predominant nerve of your parasympathetic nervous system. Slow, deep breathing will activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest side of your autonomic nervous system. It helps release hormones and neurotransmitters that will slow your heart rate, lower your blood pressure. So the deep breathing part, we don't have time right now to go through an exercise, but breathing out for twice as long as you breathe in. So if you breathe in for 2, 1, 2, breathe out for 4. So breathe out for twice as long as you breathe in, and it will stimulate your vagus nerve, which activates your parasympathetic nervous system and literally helps you calm down. It is magical, and I really encourage you to give it a try. And also manage stress by staying emotionally connected with your friends and family. Now, I am a big proponent of community. We're all dealing with a global pandemic. It's a lot harder for us to get together physically, obviously, with the need to be physically distancing. But there's still ways to connect with people, to get on video chats and to have those conversations. So adapting to the current scenario and finding a way that you can connect with people that you are close to, that makes you feel that social connection in a way that is safe given the current COVID situation. And I have a community online that I adore talking to. I love connecting with my community members. So please reach out to me if you are looking for support. It sounds so simple to reach out to someone and have a little conversation. It can be tremendously powerful, and it can help you feel less alone. So let me know in the chat box if you are feeling isolated during this COVID situation. I think a lot of people are feeling isolated right now. And even if you are living with 1 or 2 or a handful of other people in a family unit, you can still feel socially isolated because you're now removed from all of your the ways that you typically socially interacted with people. You might not have your volunteer position. You might not get out to go for lunch with your girlfriends, for example. So staying connected is so important during this time. And if you are feeling socially isolated, I want you to identify that feeling and think about how you can create opportunities for you to feel less alone in this situation. So one of our people said that they miss seeing friends and going to the mall, miss volunteering, missing hugging. Yes. So some people are on the opposite end where there's too much online stimulation. There's courses, there's Zoom meetings. It's like excessive. And that's where that piece comes in around taking these tools that I'm talking about at a high level and making them meaningful and applicable to your personal situation. So if you're currently working and you're on Zoom calls all day long and all you want to do is just get off the computer, notice that, right? And give yourself permission to set up healthy boundaries and not get on those Zoom calls with friends, because you have exacerbated your need to be on computers, and the Zoom conversations are what is exhausting you. So how can you then get centered within yourself? What makes you feel calm within yourself? Is it listening to music? Is it going for a walk in nature? There are some safe spaces that you can go wander around where you're not going to run into too many people, or you can just stay socially distant. So keeping these rules, these tips that I'm giving, and then applying them to your life in a way that's meaningful to you, because we can feel isolated and still have 10 Zoom calls a day. So think about what can help you feel more centered and more connected. So I just wanted to touch on the psychological effects of social isolation. So social support is a strong and consistent predictor of health outcomes. Social isolation predicts an increase in disease rates and also in mortality. And the interesting thing that I found some research on, socially isolated people who are also stressed out show an impact in terms of their cardiovascular health. So after they're stressed out, their heart rate and their blood pressure doesn't decrease as fast as it should. And it also impacts cortisol fluctuations, which affects their abilities to sleep. So social isolation has a physiological response in our bodies. It's associated with disease and mortality, and it really can affect a lot of our health behaviors, such as sleep. So if you are feeling socially isolated, then identify and think within yourself what you need to feel the support that you need to feel. And maybe it's disconnecting. That's going to help you feel more connected because you need connection with yourself. So figuring out what works for you and then tapping into that. And again, reach out to me if you need support. I am always here, and I love, love, love connecting with my community. So I wanted to talk about the fact that if you're feeling stressed right now, and some of you did mention that you are feeling stressed, then you probably aren't sleeping very well. And so let me know in the comments if you are also having trouble with sleep, if you are feeling stressed. And this graph really explains why that is the case, because our hormones affect when we wake up and when we go to sleep. So cortisol, that's the red line on this graph here, is peaking in the morning. So when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol peaks. And then throughout the day, it declines throughout the day slowly. And in your melatonin, which is your sleepy hormone, it is the lowest first thing in the morning. And then it rises throughout the day slowly, and it peaks right before you go to bed. And that's what makes you feel sleepy, and that's what makes you go to bed. So as you can imagine, if you're stressed out and your cortisol is spiking late at night, you're going to have some trouble sleeping, right? Because cortisol and melatonin work in opposition to each other. So if your cortisol is high, your melatonin can also be high. And so if you are having sleep difficulties, it's often because of and associated with feeling stressed out. So let's talk a little bit about sleep. If you're not sleeping well, you likely have an overactive sympathetic nervous system. That is that fight or flight stress response that we have been talking about. And you, as a result of having an overactive sympathetic nervous system, you have an underactive parasympathetic nervous system. So that rest and digest part of your nervous system is not able to activate as much as it should. Sleeping just sounds like a nice, relaxing time, but it has been associated with so many health concerns and health conditions. So it increases your blood pressure. If you are not sleeping properly, your heart is beating faster and harder than it should be. So your blood pressure is actually going to, as a result of not sleeping well, is going to be elevated. It's associated with chronic inflammation. We have talked about why chronic inflammation is bad. It's linked to diabetes and obesity. There was a question earlier about obesity and inflammation, and I want you to think about inflammation being associated with your stress response. And your stress response, if it's activated, your blood is pumping, your body is pumping sugar or glucose into your bloodstream, right? So now you have to activate that insulin hormone component to be able to get rid of some of that sugar in your bloodstream. If you don't do that effectively, it can ultimately result to diabetes and obesity because unused sugar is stored away as fat. Not sleeping well is linked to increased cardiovascular disease because of this extra strain on your blood vessels. It decreases immunity. It affects your hormone secretion. So not just melatonin and cortisol, but other hormones as well. And not sleeping well is linked to some mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression. When you are sleeping properly, it is really central to help your brain function optimally. So it's important for brain processing and memory consolidation. And the reason being is that when we use our brains throughout the day, we create all sorts of wasteful byproducts. So this is mostly leftover proteins, which if we don't do with anything to do with those proteins, if we don't do anything with them, they will clump together and cause a disruption between communication of your brain cells. And that can be toxic to your brain. But when you are sleeping properly, essentially what happens is this brain cleaning takes place. So when you are in deep sleep, these amazing cells called glial cells turn on, and all of this protein clump, these leftover wasteful protein clumps, get washed away. So it actually flushes your brain of these protein clumps or these beta amyloid plaques that build up throughout the day. So when you are in this deep sleep stage, your brain vessels shrink and the cerebral spinal fluid gets to flush through and clean out all of these wasteful products and these protein clumps. So it helps your brain function better. And of course, we know if we don't sleep properly, we feel groggy, we can't focus as well. But this is part of the reason why that is the case, because your brain is actually doing some self-cleaning while you are asleep. So studies have shown that there's a 5% increase in plaque accumulation. That's those protein clumps that we talked about, the beta amyloid plaques, after just one night of sleep deprivation. So after just one night, you can see an increase in 5% of plaque accumulation. But if you get proper sleep the next night, it'll take care of that. So important that you can have that control and take ownership over getting proper sleep, and it can help your brain function better. So inadequate sleep is associated with abnormal gene expression, which impacts how your brain cells function. And there's been some research that has linked poor sleep to increased risk of cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, as well as type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is coming up time and time again. The mechanism by which sleep or fragmented sleep disrupts or increases your likelihood of type 2 diabetes is not fully understood currently, but there is a belief that fragmented sleep decreases your insulin sensitivity. Insulin is the hormone that helps take the sugar out of your blood and pull it up into the cells that need it. If your insulin isn't working properly, then that is one of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, but it means that your sugar is not being metabolized properly and efficiently. And so your sugar isn't being metabolized in your brain, which affects your memory capacity and your learning capacity. And it can also damage your brain cells. So fragmented sleep impacts this insulin sensitivity. So important to think about how it is that we can begin to improve our sleep. And one of the ways to understand it is to think about your circadian rhythm. You have this 24-hour-ish internal body clock. It's this daily rhythm that cycles between sleepiness and being alert. And it really regulates a lot of our biological processes. So hormone production and release, our body temperature, our sugar metabolism, as I mentioned. And so it's really important to think about how we can support or build a healthy circadian rhythm. And it's called a circadian rhythm for a reason. It is based on rhythmic behaviors. It's very patterned. So if you have disrupted sleep, your body is following in a logical pattern, and it only knows how to follow the pattern that it's been following for however long. So to be able to fix your sleep, think about fixing your circadian rhythm and getting your body back into a proper flow of activity, a proper sleep-wakeful cycle to help support your circadian rhythm and have a healthy pattern. One of the most powerful contributors to how our circadian rhythm functions is light. So sunlight, but also light from electronics. So it makes sense to think if the sun rises, we get up. That's the way our bodies have been sort of, our internal clocks have been set. And it makes sense because we wake up in the morning for the most part, obviously, unless we have little kids or we are working a night shift. But also the light from your electronics has the same impact, and it will affect your circadian rhythm. So we only have 10 minutes left, and I want you to think about how you are sleeping. Let me know in the chat box. I'm going to get back to that near the end of the talk here. But I want to talk about sleep hygiene. So what can you do that can help support your circadian rhythm so that you are better able to sleep? Let's just see how people are sleeping. Difficulty getting to sleep. I sleep in the daylight, not at night. So someone thought that this went till 2. It actually goes till 2:30. Yeah, I'm gonna finish at 2, and then we're gonna have half an hour for Q&A. So people are having trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. So what can you do? One of the main things, because light is such an important contributor to our circadian rhythm, is to avoid screens at night. It turns your brain on, and you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to be stimulating your brain. You don't want it to be activated and thinking that it's the morning time. So the screens can actually increase your cortisol hormone. It causes a spike in cortisol, which means that your melatonin isn't able to get elevated. And we need our melatonin to elevate to be able to fall asleep. So if you do use screens a lot, then I encourage you to think about getting blue blocking glasses. And also to avoid or minimize the use of screens at night. Also, sleep in a cool, dark room. I think everyone knows that. Keeping a regular schedule is really important, especially if you're having trouble sleeping or staying asleep, because you want to create a reliable expectation for your body. You want your circadian rhythm to become healthier. So you need to set up these regular patterns where your body can say, oh, I know what's happening. We go to bed at this time every day and we get up at this time every day. So I can get used to the habit and form healthier patterns. Avoid caffeine after 2 p.m., so reducing those stimulants. And also exercising. Physically exercising your body will help you increase your sleep drive throughout the day, but also exercising your brain. So let's talk about mental challenges for the last few minutes here, about another 10 minutes or so. So what comes to mind when I say mental challenges? What do you think of? Mental challenges, puzzles. Okay. Crossword puzzles. Work. Sudoku. Okay, so mental challenges aren't necessarily associated with just these puzzles that we can do or brain games, because remember, these brain games really help you get better at the specifics of the game, but not getting better at anything else. I want you to think outside of the box. Think about mental challenges as being sustained mental effort. So engaging in some sort of intellectual endeavor, it could be a conversation, it can be an interesting movie or a book, but it's sustained mental effort. And my favorite project when I talk about mental challenges is this project called the Synapse Project that was run by a woman named Dr. Denise Park and published in 2014. They talked about the differences between productive engagement versus receptive engagement. Productive engagement is the acquisition of novel information. It's new learning and new information. Versus receptive engagement is relying on existing knowledge or familiar material. So those puzzles, crossword puzzles, that I would argue is a form of receptive engagement. In the Synapse Project, they helped people get into this productive engagement phase by having them acquire a new skill. So people either learned photography, if they weren't familiar with it, how to use software on the computer and run these computer software programs associated with their camera, or they did quilting. And in both cases, this was novel information to them. They were challenging themselves week after week. It was a 14-week program. They were really sort of embedded in this new knowledge acquisition. Another example would be me, for example, building a business. I have not built a business ever before. I come from a research background, a PhD, an academic background. I didn't know anything about business development. So it's a whole new learning experience. I'm submerged in new learning and sustained mental challenge day after day. What they found in this Synapse Project, on the right-hand side, you'll see a graph. The orange bars are the productive engagement group. Those are the people that were in sustained mental challenge. After the 14 weeks of being in sustained mental challenge, when people were acquiring a demanding new skill, they showed greater improvements in memory after the 14-week program. And they also showed increases in brain activation. So it not only changed their memory performance, it changed how their brain was functioning by challenging themselves week after week. And just a side note that these brain changes, they looked at them a year later and they noticed that a lot of them went back to the baseline level. And this is because for our brains to have this change be sustained, we have to continuously submerge ourselves in challenging situations and challenging environments. It's not just I challenged myself last week and now my brain is activated in a certain way. You have to keep challenging yourself and keep pushing the needle. So I want to hear from you about your interests and hobbies and what makes you uncomfortable. Because when we talk about mental challenges, it's so important that your mental challenges are unique to you. There's no list of things I can put on the screen here that will help you be mentally challenged. It's yours. It's based on your interests and hobbies. It's based on your skill level. It's based on what it is that you know currently, and how can you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. So for example, I give academic talks all the time. So it's not a mental challenge for me to give an academic talk. But if I was going to run a 2-day conference, I haven't done that before. So that would be me pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, but still being within my ability level. So thinking about what your interests are, what your hobbies are, what you like to do, and then how do you build your challenge around that and get a little bit uncomfortable, because when we challenge ourselves, it doesn't necessarily feel good right away. It is good for our brains, but it doesn't necessarily feel good because it's uncomfortable, it's challenging. We're maybe facing a little bit of a roadblock. We have to push through it, and that's the piece that activates our brain. So when we think about our goals, what it is that we want to do to challenge ourselves, I encourage you to create goals that are SMART. So you want your goals to be specific. So you want to be very clear in terms of how it is that you identify what goal you want to set out. You want to be measurable. So you want to make sure, so for example, specific would be, I want to exercise for 30 minutes a day. I want to do weight training every day. That's my exercise routine. That is a very specific. I want to exercise and I want to use weights. Measurable, it is, what does it mean for me to be successful? So I want to be using weights 3 times a week. Now it's measurable because I'm identifying 3 times a week means that I'm successful. I'm not saying that's what you need to aim for, but that's what success means to me. Is it attainable and realistic? I need to make sure that I can attain that goal. Do I have weights at home right now? Because if I don't, then it's not really attainable and realistic, because I can't weight train at home and all the gyms are closed. So you need to make sure that your goal of weight training 3 times a week is attainable and realistic given the current life circumstances. So you need to have the weights and the equipment, or at least something that you can lift that can be used as weights. And then time bound, establishing a deadline to achieve the goal. So in this case, I want to achieve the weight training 3 times a week. That's time bound, because every week I'll be able to decide whether I achieve that goal or not. Now, I am very cognizant of time. I want you to think about a SMART goal that you want to achieve. I want you to write it down, and we will get back to it once we get to the Q&A. Think about a SMART goal that you want to achieve, a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. And in order to help you to frame out these SMART goals, I have a gift to give you, and I'll tell you how you can get that at the end of the talk, but it is my Brain Boosting Starter Kit, and it walks you through identifying brain healthy goals for yourself and then creating SMART goals. So creating goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, and then having a way to measure success. So using a tracker, which is also included in this Brain Boosting Starter Kit, so that you can see how successful you are in achieving your goals, and then making modifications, adjusting your goals based on your success. So I'll tell you how you can get that at the end of the presentation. All of this information that I'm sharing today, I talk all about goal setting, I talk about stress, I talk about sleep all the time in my social media accounts, but also on my podcast. If you listen to podcasts, I would be honored if you also tuned into my podcast called the Brain Shape Podcast. Brain Shape is one word. I talk all about brain health and aging, different ways to implement healthy behaviors in your life. And I also interview incredible experts in the field. And so I really strongly encourage you to, if you're interested in healthy aging, to go in and listen to the podcast. There's currently 64 episodes. A new episode comes out every single Tuesday. It's on all of the podcast platforms, or you can listen directly through my website, brainshape.ca/podcast. And as we are closing, I want to remind you, and I'll get to all of your questions in a minute, that transformation requires more than just information. So today, you got a lot of information. I talked about some strategies that you can implement in your life. It requires some tweaking because you have to personalize them and make them appropriate for you and your current scenario and your current capabilities. And this global pandemic, also considering that as a limitation. Transformation, if you want to transform your stress experiences, if you want to transform how you're sleeping, or create more opportunities for you to challenge yourself and to engage your brain and be embedded and immersed in sustained mental challenge, you can't just consume information and that's it. You have to take action. You have to start doing things in your everyday life that support the changes that you want to make. And I know that you can do it. I just encourage you to actually take those steps. And the steps only need to be small, but they can be tremendously powerful. And to help you on that journey, I wanted to give you this brain boosting starter kit. It really helps you identify your brain health goals in all of the 4 pillars of brain health, and then figuring out how to build SMART goals around those specific targets of habits and goals that you want to set for yourself. And then to track those habits, because then you can see how well you are achieving your SMART goals. So to get the brain boosting starter kit, you have to complete the survey that is going to be sent out by Programs for 50 Plus about this workshop. So they just are looking for feedback on the workshop. If you complete that survey, then they will give you a copy of the brain boosting starter kit. So before we get to the Q&A, I do want to invite Mary in to say a few words.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Andrea. This is a very insightful presentation on the impact that chronic stress and social isolation that I think we're all feeling at the moment, but the impact that it's having on creating chronic inflammation, as you mentioned, sleep disruption, and most importantly, how it is affecting our cognitive health. But there's also a lot of positive, encouraging news that there is help in terms of, you touched on the plasticity, the brain plasticity, and that's really fascinating information. Maybe we can do an entire different talk on just brain plasticity in the future, but that our brains are really able to change themselves, and most importantly, changing the trajectory to healthy aging, that it doesn't have to be static as we always thought the brain was aging and that was it. So that was very fascinating. Thank you.